Hello and welcome to a humble Highland home. Thank you so much for joining me here on this snowy day today. In the past 4 days we've experienced storms, floods, landslides, and now the snow and ice has returned. In my last video I described just how high the water in the burn got, and it happened again. This is it now. But this is it 2 days ago. I've had to turn the volume down on the video because the noise is just deafening. Most of the water comes directly off the hills, so when we have a lot of rain, the water finds the easiest route down the hill and eventually it ends up in the river. This means we can have streams where there were none before, but luckily our burn copes with the extremities that nature throws at it throughout the year. As much as it is very cold today, I just feel the need to do something productive in the garden. I need to feel and smell the soil. I know it'll be spring all too soon, but just for today, I need that wee top up outside in the garden. Now, one job I can do is to check the soil in the containers that I have stored under the protection of the polytunnel. I still like to grow in containers, as well as the polytunnel, the greenhouse, the outdoor garden spaces, and in winter time within the cottage too. But at one time I only had containers to grow in, but it worked well for me at that time of my life. I still grow in many different containers, but over the past 3 years I've been buying more and more of these black heavy-duty 30-litre buckets. The handles on them make them a lot easier to move around, especially when I need to. And this year I have an extra 10 as I intend to grow all of our tatties in these buckets. I've saved a select amount of tatties from the later crops of last year, which have now become my seed potatoes for this year. I grew some Maris Piper main crops and some Charpeau Mira, which is a blight resistant type of potato, and they are chitting in a windowsill in the cottage as we speak. The only seed potatoes I need to buy for this year are my second earlies, which I usually get a variety called Charlotte. Baloo will try anything to get in the polytunnel. So to avoid any mishaps, he can go and join his brother for a little while in the house just while I'm in here today. The containers outside obviously have access to all the elements, but inside the soil in the containers is at risk of drying out, which is not good. Once soil has completely dried out, it is very difficult to revive it, as soil has got living organisms in it that need to be kept alive. Even if you water very dry soil, most of the water will just run off as it's got nothing to hold on to, so it's best to keep soil moist and protected when it's not in use. I had some crops growing in these containers last year, so I'm just squeezing some of the soil together just to see how well it holds, to check the moisture content and to see if it needs some extra moisture to keep it going over the rest of the winter time. When it comes to planting in containers that already have some old soil or compost in it, I would just add some fresh compost on top so some of the nutrients run down into the soil below. And once I've done this a few times of growing, then I would replace it all. However, even when I'm filling a new container, I will maybe use half homemade compost, then topped up with some shop-bought compost, and this brings the cost down incredibly. This compost here is starting to get a little bit dry for my liking, so I'm just going to top it up with a little bit of water, a little bit at a time. Our growing year here in the Highlands of Scotland is very short, so if possible I try to grow on a second crop wherever I can. Now last year, after I'd harvested some potatoes out of these buckets, I had some young leeks ready to go in. I also planted some carrot seeds in another bucket, and hopefully they'll start to grow again as the temperature starts to rise, but we shall see. They're all alive and green just now, but we've still got some very cool times ahead of us yet. I have lots of trees and shrubs all growing in pots and containers, waiting until it's the right time for them to be planted out, and when I've got the space available for them. I also have some fruit trees that are happily growing in containers and have done for many years as I've taken them from garden to garden. There are so many different containers that you can grow in, as long as they've got drainage holes and you've got a little bit of extra time to care for them, because they do need a little bit more watering and feeding, then you are good to go. These are old mushroom containers that were gifted, and these fit perfectly on our kitchen windowsills, much to Adam's dismay. I've put holes in the top one and I've kept the bottom one as a watering tray. They are perfect to get seeds started or to grow a windowsill full of sprouted greens, salads or herbs, especially in winter time when there isn't much greenery around. When I use these containers outside, I wouldn't use the bottom tray, as they would then store too much rainwater and become overwatered and could drown or rot the plant roots. Plants need to breathe. I also grow in these discarded vegetable trays that I inherited. Again, the top tray I put holes in for drainage, and the one underneath to catch the water, but only if I'm bringing them indoors or I plan to water from the bottom. I even grow things in these old tin cans. Adam put some drainage holes in the bottom and took off any sharp edges before I started growing. I think I grew some salads in here one year. as much as it's freezing cold outside just now, I always feel so much better for getting out in the fresh air and doing a little bit in the garden. And I find that I really appreciate the heat going into the cottage so much more. I'm going to be using these old shop crates to grow more shallow rooted edibles this year. Things like salad, rocket and radish, etc. And this will leave more space in the polytunnel and outdoor growing space for other things that I would like to grow. I'm lining them with cardboard to keep the compost in, but to allow the excess water to seep through as drainage. If I didn't have any cardboard, I would use a cut down old compost bag and place some holes in the bottom for the drainage. Now these crates will take a lot of soil or compost to fill them up. So as I said before, I am using part homemade compost topped up with a layer of shop bought compost. It is frozen in places, but it's still workable just now. But just remember that compost can only hold so many nutrients, so they will need to be fed every so often with a suitable fertiliser. I just use a manure tea that I will make in springtime, but there are many others that you can make or buy, like worm tea or nettle tea or seaweed tea, or you can buy one. I use an organic growing method, so I avoid anything that's not up to par. I would advise you to do your own research on that one and find out what works for you. This strip of growing space in the polytunnel wasn't being used, so I covered it over and it's now been used to store these containers ready for planting up. Then they will go back outside, ready for me to bring the rest of the polytunnel back to life for this year's growing season. And just before I head back into the cottage, I'm having a quick check of the garlic before closing up for the night. The temperature just hasn't lifted today, so I've kept the fleecy covers in place. So let me know in the comments below if you're a container gardener and how you get on with yours. But for now, thank you so much for joining me here today. Take care of yourself and others, and I'll see you in the next video.